vulnerability, defining, and aligning. So we have to get in alignment with it. Yeah, so I had a hard time when I first looked at this topic. Like, who wants to be vulnerable? And why would anybody want to be vulnerable? And I know times that I do feel vulnerable. I'll do things like when I'm going somewhere at night, I'll try and park in the light at the front of the building instead of back in the far corner. Those are physical things. I keep quiet in a group of people that I don't know. And getting up here and sharing my talks, and it comes from deep inside when I write these talks, and I share my ideas and my experience. Very vulnerable. I think I'm losing this. It's sinking. Now, we aren't vulnerable unless we are being authentic. That was our topic last month, authenticity. Because I can share, very easily share something that, who I'd like to be. That would work better for me, but it's not real. And so the things that make me feel vulnerable are the things that are authentic. So they go together. Now, I called a friend to have a conversation about this, and I was talking, like, why would anybody want to be vulnerable? Like, what's the reason for wanting to be vulnerable? And so it led us to connection. How can we connect unless we're connecting from somewhere deep inside? And I know there's different people we can connect on different levels. There's that discretion that is open to us. But connection's a good thing. Now, we aren't being vulnerable unless we are being authentic. And it's not authentic if we only share what we think is acceptable. That's called filtering. And I think we all do this. I mean, there's a certain amount that we know there's some people we can't share everything with, and in certain places we can't. You know, there's different groups of people and stuff like that, but it's, I think, almost essential to have a group of people that you can share everything, somehow. Whether it's a practitioner, or a counselor or something like that. Like, that's where you want to open up the most, because they're there to help you, and they're not judgmental. I watch those talent shows, and at the end of those, the series, the finalists are all just as talented. But the people that are chosen to win are the ones that let their barriers down and get real, because that touches people. The audience can feel it when their emotions, and they're right into the song and it means something to them. So vulnerability is a key ingredient in our own personal transformation, as it creates an expanded awareness of what lies just below the surface. And if we look at vulnerability through this lens, we will begin to see how vulnerability is a building block for a thriving, healthy community. Yeah, so vulnerability becomes the crucial starting point for authenticity and connection. And to the extent that we begin to foster this in ourselves, we can begin to invite others to do the same. We can be the leader, lead the way, show them the way. So there is an irresistible potential pressing against everyone for self-expression. This is Ernest Holmes' quote. If we listen, we shall hear it, not as a voice, but as a feeling, as a divine urge to express. I don't know. I get up here every week and I got something to say, and it wasn't always like that. So I had to, I did some deep digging first, back when I was taking my training. But the willingness to take the risk of authentic living may open us up to challenges along the way. And that leads us to the very outpicturing of the irresistible potential within all of us. There's always something inside of us that's calling out to come up and be expressed. And I'm not talking here about spilling everything to everybody. We don't have to be completely open. We still, there's people that are appropriate that we can do that with, and others we don't. We trust our gut on that, I think. But how do we know what comes next until we try? How do we know what lies beneath until we start the process? Stepping outside of our comfort zone can trigger something within us that exposes a feeling that might have been dormant. And we get to learn something that we have not learned before. Now, I grew up with the message that our feelings weren't important. What counted was rules and intellect. So I have a hard time even being aware of my feelings or understanding my feelings. So what is it? Vulnerability, what is it? Brené Brown, we always find a lot of wisdom. Her writing is quoted a lot in these papers I get. She defines vulnerability as a state of emotional exposure that comes with a certain degree of uncertainty. It involves a person's willingness to accept the emotional risk that comes from being open and willing to love and be loved. I like that. I went to Tulsa for quite a while, and one of the most vulnerable things is doing a fifth step and telling somebody about it, which is, going through all the uncomfortable stuff inside, dealing with the things that you think you did wrong, or when you hurt somebody. You can do it from a number of different ways, but the thing is, it's digging deeper each time you do it. And when we dig deeper, that's when we find out really who we are underneath all the crap. And what it is not. Vulnerability is not oversharing or dumping inappropriate amounts of emotions or personal history with wild abandon. It is not for the sake of saying, look at me, I'm being vulnerable, and I'm sharing all my stuff. The tone and the motive of vulnerability, in a sense, is one that is born from a desire to fully express oneself for the purpose of authenticity and connection. To be vulnerable is not to be without boundaries, nor is it to be a doormat. Vulnerability is a conscious choice to express thoughts, feelings, and desires in a way that serves to nurture an authentic life. And why is it important? The willingness to engage in the exploration of our own authenticity invites others to do the same. It calls us to create safe places, safe communities, and safe relationships. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what we are doing here, excuse me. I forget my teaching sometimes. So, vulnerability becomes the starting point of authenticity and connection, not only to ourselves, but to spirit and the world around us. It calls us to bring our own unique expression to life while extending the same invitation to others. Like when we show the way when we do it ourselves, and it does give permission for other people to step up and join us. So authenticity and meaningful connection are born out of vulnerability. And vulnerability allows us to build trust and intimacy in relationships. When you meet somebody, you might share a little bit and they respond okay. There's no condemnation or something. So then you're encouraged to share a little bit more, and then maybe they share a bit, and together we build a relationship by sharing these things that are within us. Most of our time when we meet people, it's very surface, and we know how to be polite and all that stuff and not get in trouble, but when you start digging deep, you need to find safe people to share that with. That's what we want to build in this place. That's what we are building. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It is about showing up and being seen, even in the face of fear and shame. Those are the things that sometimes we carry from our childhood. And when we shine a light on them, they disappear into the nothingness from which they came. So there's a story that supports today's topic. It's after the resurrection, Jesus presented his wounds to his grieving friends. John 20:20 says, Jesus came and stood among his disciples and said, "Peace be with you." Then he showed them his hands and his side. He did not try to hide the mark from the spear. He did not wear gloves to conceal his injured hands. He was shameless. Like a middle-aged woman with stretch marks swimming in a two-piece. And in the same way, Jesus was unashamed of his wounded body. He never recoiled from disease or deformity. We've seen how he reached out his hand to touch the bodies of lepers, the blind, the possessed, those who were wounded physically, spiritually, and socially. And he knew that in his resurrection, he would be known by his brokenness and scars. Isn't that true for us as well? We're known by our experiences. It's formed who we think we are. It's formed our reactions to things. Because sometimes, if you've been hurt, a certain way, the next time you approach that same situation, you might be a little more cautious. And that's not a bad thing. But sometimes those hurts can build up so much that we don't want to take a risk connecting to anybody. We don't trust the process. And that's why it's so important to look at what's inside and understand where it came from and do something about it. That's what we're doing here. So authenticity, vulnerability, and history leads us to connection. So to repeat, so the process is to be vulnerable and real with oneself and be willing to take an honest look inside. And sometimes this involves help with somebody else, like a counselor, practitioner, whatever. We all have guilt, shame, different experiences, talents, personalities. But those are the things that make us unique. We all bring something different to the conversation because of the experiences we've had and the way we look at things. And if we aren't sharing them with the people we care about, if we aren't being authentic, how real is the relationship? It's something to think about. And I'm going to leave you with that, because this is a deep topic. And I don't want to add too much to it. So thank you for listening.